Blood streamed down 13-year-old Elijah Washington's face as Officer Brennan stood over him, brass knuckles gleaming. Neither knew this moment would trigger a national uprising, expose generations of police corruption, or that Judge Washington would soon risk everything for justice his badge could never deliver. Before we dive into this shocking story of injustice and the fight for accountability, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves equal treatment under the law, and subscribe to join our community fighting for justice. Now, let's uncover how a single moment of police brutality against a young black boy shattered lives and exposed a system rotting from within. 13-year-old Elijah Washington adjusted his backpack containing his prized possession, a professional-grade telescope his parents had given him for his birthday last month, as he walked home through the tree-lined streets of Oakwood Heights. The affluent Atlanta neighborhood still felt new to him, 3 months after his family had moved into their Georgian-style home. Academically gifted with particular talents in science and mathematics, Elijah had recently been accepted into Oakwood Preparatory Academy, a prestigious school known for launching students toward Ivy League futures. Reserved by nature, Elijah preferred the company of stars to most people, finding comfort in their predictable patterns and ancient light. This Thursday afternoon, he'd stayed late at school to prepare for the upcoming science fair, where his project on light pollution's effect on urban astronomy observation had already generated buzz among his teachers. The neighborhood streets were quiet as afternoon turned to early evening, perfect for Elijah to pause occasionally mentally mapping the locations where he might get the clearest views of Jupiter's moons later that night. Several blocks away, Officer Ryan Brennan cruised slowly in his patrol car, his mood as dark as the tinted windows of his vehicle. At 38, the 15-year veteran of the Atlanta Police Department had developed a reputation within the force, though it differed greatly depending on who you asked. To his superiors, he was a dedicated officer who kept problem elements out of prestigious neighborhoods like Oakwood Heights. To the few fellow officers who still maintained their conscience, he was a ticking time bomb of racial hatred and unchecked aggression. To the black and brown communities he patrolled, he was simply terror in a uniform. Brennan's personnel file contained 7 formal complaints of excessive force against minorities, all dismissed through the protective mechanisms of internal affairs and the police union. His recent divorce had worsened his already volatile temperament, fueling his bitterness toward the changing demographics of Atlanta, which he viewed as personal affronts to his authority. Today, he was responding to a call from a neighborhood association member about suspicious youth in the area code language he understood perfectly. Brennan spotted Elijah standing on the sidewalk, looking intently at houses through what the officer immediately assumed was a casing technique. The boy's expensive clothes and backpack registered to Brennan not as signs of belonging to the neighborhood, but as evidence of potential theft. Without activating his lights or siren, he pulled his cruiser to the curb and exited in one fluid motion, hand already resting on his weapon. "Hey, you! What are you doing here?" he barked, covering the distance between them in aggressive strides. Elijah turned momentarily confused by the hostile approach. "I live here, sir," he responded politely, his voice steady despite the sudden confrontation. Years of his father's careful coaching about interactions with police officers guiding his response. "I'm just walking home from school." Brennan's eyes narrowed. "Sure you do? Which house exactly? And what were you looking at just now?" His tone made it clear he believed nothing coming from Elijah's mouth. 423 Maple Avenue, sir. It's 3 blocks from here." Elijah replied, pointing in the direction. "I was just looking at roof lines to figure out where I'd get the best star visibility tonight. I'm an amateur astronomer." Brennan scoffed. "Astronomer, right. Empty your pockets now." When Elijah hesitated, confused by the escalation, Brennan reached for his radio. "Dispatch, I've got a potential burglar casing houses in Oakwood Heights. Requesting backup at Maple and Highland." Elijah's heart rate doubled as he recognized the dangerous territory this encounter had entered. Slowly, he reached for his phone in his pocket. "I'd like to call my father, please, sir." Brennan's reaction was instant and violent. "He's reaching cool," he shouted, though no one was present to hear it except Mrs. Eleanor Sampson, who had begun filming from behind her living room curtains across the street. In one motion, Brennan tackled Elijah to the ground, the boy's slender frame no match for the officer's 240 pounds of weight. As Elijah's telescope crashed to the sidewalk, its lens shattering, Brennan reached into his own pocket and slipped something metal over his knuckles, something department regulations explicitly forbade a set of brass knuckles, his preferred tool for street justice. "Please," Elijah gasped. "I wasn't doing anything wrong." His words were cut short by the first blow, brass knuckles connecting with his cheekbone with a sickening crack. "You people need to learn," Brennan growled, raising his fist again. "This isn't your neighborhood." The second blow split Elijah's eyebrow, sending blood streaming down his face. The third struck his mouth, shattering 2 teeth. Through it all, Brennan spewed racial slurs that Mrs. Sampson's video would later capture with perfect clarity. From other houses, additional cameras and phones recorded the assault. One neighbor called 911, reporting an officer beating a child nearly to death. Through the haze of pain, with blood filling his mouth, Elijah managed 6 clear words. "My father is Federal Judge Marcus Washington." Brennan's fist, raised for another strike, froze in mid-air. His expression transformed from rage to something new, fear. In that moment, 2 patrol cars rounded the corner, responding to both Brennan's call and the neighbor's emergency reports. Officer Melissa Chen was first out of her vehicle, her face registering shock as she recognized both Brennan's illegal weapon and, more significantly, the boy's name. "That's Judge Washington's son," she hissed to her partner as they rushed forward. The other officers immediately shifted from backup mode to damage control, one kicking Brennan's brass knuckles discreetly under a nearby bush, while another called for paramedics with highest priority as they pulled Brennan off the semi-conscious boy. Elijah's eyes rolled back and he slipped into unconsciousness. The last thing he heard was Officer Chen's panicked voice. "What have you done, Ryan? Do you have any idea whose son this is?" The emergency entrance of Atlanta Memorial Hospital burst into activity as Federal Judge Marcus Washington and Dr. Kimberly Washington rushed through the sliding doors, faces etched with the particular anguish only parents with an injured child can know. Hospital staff recognized them immediately, not just from their prominent positions, but from the countless charity fundraisers and medical ethics conferences where Dr. Washington had been keynote speaker. Marcus Washington had earned his reputation as one of the most respected federal judges in the Southern District, known for fairness that transcended political divides. His rulings reflected a deep commitment to constitutional principles rather than partisan leanings, making him simultaneously admired and difficult to categorize. At 48, his distinguished career included landmark decisions on civil rights cases and corporate accountability. Kimberly Washington, at 46, had pioneered several pediatric surgical techniques that had become standard practice across the country. Her medical research on childhood trauma had earned international recognition, and the cruel irony that she now faced her own child's trauma was not lost on the attending physicians who greeted them. "Judge and Dr. Washington," the emergency department chief said, intercepting them at the nurses' station. "Elijah is stable. I've put our best people on his case." The preferential treatment was obvious, the doctor personally escorting them rather than sending a nurse. In any other circumstance, the Washingtons might have noticed and been uncomfortable with the special attention, but now they noticed nothing but the urgent need to reach their son. Elijah lay in a trauma bay, monitors beeping steadily. His face was nearly unrecognizable, swollen to grotesque proportions on the left side. Dried blood still caked parts of his neck, despite nurses' attempts to clean him. A preliminary chart hanging at the foot of his bed listed the injuries: orbital socket fracture, mandibular fracture, concussion, dental damage, facial lacerations, and extensive bruising. Kimberly immediately examined the chart with professional precision, while Marcus stood motionless, absorbing the violence that had been visited upon his child. His exterior remained composed, the same judicial calm that had served him through the most challenging cases, but internally a rage built that he had never before experienced. While Kimberly conferred with the medical team about treatment options and immediate surgical needs, Marcus stepped into the hallway to make a call. Before he could dial, Police Captain James Reynolds approached, flanked by 2 officers who kept a respectful distance. "Judge Washington," Reynolds began, his tone professionally sympathetic, but with an undertone of calculation. "I can't express how deeply troubled the department is by this incident." Marcus studied the captain's face, years of bench experience giving him instant insight into the man's true purpose. "Captain Reynolds, I appreciate your concern. I assume Officer Brennan is already in custody for the assault on my son." Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. "Officer Brennan has been placed on administrative leave with pay pending our internal investigation. These situations require proper procedure to—" "My son was beaten unconscious with an illegal weapon by a uniformed officer." Marcus interrupted, his voice perfectly level. "There are multiple witnesses and video evidence. This isn't a procedural gray area." Reynolds lowered his voice. "Judge, we all want the same thing here. Justice served appropriately. Perhaps we could discuss how to resolve the situation privately with fair compensation for Elijah's medical expenses and suffering without dragging this through a public process that benefits nobody." Marcus Washington's gaze could have frozen fire. "Are you suggesting I allow the department to buy my silence while an officer who nearly killed my child faces no consequences?" Before Reynolds could respond, a nurse hurried up to Kimberly in the trauma bay doorway, whispering urgently. Kimberly's expression shifted from concern to anger as she excused herself and followed the nurse to a staff area where a young medical assistant was hurriedly copying Elijah's admission records. "Dr. Washington," the assistant stammered, clearly caught. "I was just making copies for the file." "All records are electronic," Kimberly stated flatly. "Who asked you to make these copies?" The assistant's eyes flickered toward Captain Reynolds. Before further conversation could occur, the hospital doors opened again, admitting a sharp-featured young black woman in an impeccable suit. Zara Johnson, 32, had been Judge Washington's clerk 3 years prior, before establishing her own practice focusing on civil rights violations. Without preamble, she approached Marcus. "Judge Washington, I came as soon as I heard. I've already filed for preservation of all evidence, including surveillance footage, body cameras, and radio transmissions. The brass knuckles have mysteriously disappeared from the scene, but 3 witnesses photographed them." Marcus nodded gratefully. "Zara, thank you." As they spoke, another figure entered, Pastor Raymond Thomas of First Community Church, a longtime family friend and prominent civil rights activist whose congregation included many victims of police misconduct. His presence carried the weight of historical struggle, his 65 years having witnessed everything from Jim Crow to modern systemic inequality. "Marcus, Kimberly, so," he said solemnly, embracing them both. "The community is already mobilizing. This isn't just about Elijah, though he's our primary concern now. This is about all our children." A commotion from Elijah's room drew everyone's attention. The boy had regained consciousness, disoriented, and in pain. Kimberly rushed to his side, maternal instinct overriding professional detachment. "Mom?" Elijah's voice was distorted by swelling and injury. "What happened? Where am I?" Marcus moved to his son's bedside, gently taking his hand. "You're in the hospital, son. You're going to be okay." Elijah's next words carried a clarity that belied his physical state. "He kept hitting me, Dad. I told him I lived there. I told him who you were. He called me things." Captain Reynolds, who had followed them into the room, cleared his throat. "Son, I know this is difficult, but can you tell us if you in any way resisted the officer's lawful commands?" Zara stepped between Reynolds and the bed, My client will not be answering questions without proper representation and medical clearance. Your client. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. I wasn't aware the boy needed an attorney if this is the straightforward situation Judge Washington describes. Outside the hospital room, a nurse turned up the volume on a small break room television where breaking news showed cell phone footage of Elijah's assault. The video, already viral on social media, clearly showed Brennan's unprovoked attack and captured audio of his racial slurs. The hospital staff watched in horrified silence as the footage played, then cut to Officer Brennan's official police photo alongside an image of Judge Washington at a recent judicial conference. Within minutes, media vans began arriving in the hospital parking lot. Inside Elijah's room, Marcus Washington faced his first moral crossroads in this journey, whether to leverage his considerable power and connections for immediate action against Brennan or to trust the same justice system he had served faithfully for decades, knowing its deep structural flaws when it came to police accountability. As Judge Washington contemplated this decision, watching his son drift back into medicated sleep, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. Nothing in his distinguished career had prepared him for fighting for justice when the victim was his own child. Internal Affairs. Detective Sandra Morris adjusted her blazer before entering the conference room where Officer Ryan Brennan sat with his union representative. At 43, Morris had cultivated an image of impartiality during her 8 years in IA, though few knew of her private dinner meetings with Police Chief Richard Crawford. Officer Brennan, she began, voice professionally neutral, I'm here to take your statement regarding yesterday's incident with Elijah Washington. Across town, Chief Crawford stood before a forest of microphones, his silver-templed authority figure appearance carefully crafted over 20 years of political aspirations. The Atlanta Police Department is committed to a thorough and transparent investigation, he announced to the assembled press. Officer Brennan has been placed on administrative leave while we gather all facts. We ask the public to reserve judgment until our investigation is complete. What Crawford didn't mention was his monthly meetings with the police union leadership that had donated significantly to his rumored upcoming mayoral campaign, or the 3 times he had personally intervened to keep Brennan on the force despite serious misconduct. As Crawford fielded carefully selected questions from reporters, officers Daniels and Mercer visited Eleanor Sampson, whose video of the assault had gained 2 million views overnight. Ma'am, we'll need your original video as evidence. Daniels explained, his tone pleasant, but his eyes cold. And we should inform you that sharing evidence in an ongoing investigation could potentially interfere with justice. Mrs. Sampson, a 71-year-old retired English teacher, recognized intimidation tactics when she heard them. I've already sent the video to my lawyer and several news outlets, she replied, but I'm happy to provide another copy for your investigation. Across Oakwood Heights, similar visits occurred at homes of other witnesses. Meanwhile, in the evidence room, Technical Officer Jason Patel received unusual instructions regarding Officer Brennan's dashcam footage and body camera data. System glitch, his supervisor explained vaguely. These files need special processing before review. Hours later, Detective Morris would note in her preliminary report that equipment malfunction resulted in no usable body camera footage, and dashcam positioning did not capture the interaction. Simultaneously, Administrative Assistant Claire Wilson received a request to provide Brennan's personnel file to Internal Affairs with specific instructions. Provide only the last 3 years of service records and performance evaluations. 6 complaints from minority citizens vanished from the file that reached Detective Morris's desk. At precinct headquarters, the blue wall of silence solidified as Officer Chen and others who had responded to the scene received clear, if unspoken, messages about loyalty. You arrived after the resistance occurred. Lieutenant Parker reminded Chen during a casual coffee break. Your perspective was limited to the aftermath. Remember, by afternoon, the police union's public relations team had crafted talking points distributed to friendly media outlets. Officer responding to community complaints about suspicious activity. Subject's movements interpreted as potential threat. Unfortunate misunderstanding escalated by resistance. These narratives found particular resonance on certain news channels and social media groups, where law and order messaging typically thrived. In response, Atlanta's black community mobilized with remarkable speed. Pastor Raymond Thomas opened his church for an emergency community meeting that overflowed into the street. "They're already trying to control the story," he told the gathered crowd. "But we have something they don't: the truth captured on video and the moral authority of justice." Social media hashtag #justice for Elijah began trending nationally, with celebrities and activists amplifying the cause. The hospital had to establish a security checkpoint due to the volume of visitors and well-wishers attempting to reach Elijah's room. Judge Washington, recognizing the machinery of institutional protection activating around Brennan, made a call to FBI agent Taylor Rodriguez, a trusted contact from several federal cases involving civil rights violations. "Taylor, this isn't just about my son anymore," he explained. "The department's response suggests a systematic approach to covering up officer misconduct. I'm concerned about witness intimidation and evidence tampering." Agent Rodriguez promised to make preliminary inquiries, though jurisdiction remained complicated without clear evidence of civil rights violations as defined by federal statute. Do you believe police departments should be allowed to investigate their own officers in cases of alleged misconduct? Comment number 1 if you think independent oversight is essential, or number 2 if you believe internal affairs can handle these cases fairly. Hit that like button if you think body cameras should be mandatory and tampering with footage should carry serious consequences. Subscribe now to follow Elijah's fight for justice as we uncover the dark machinery working against him. Meanwhile, at her small law office, Zara Johnson discovered something disturbing while researching Officer Brennan's history. 5 excessive force complaints in Brennan's precinct in the last year alone, all involving black males, all dismissed, she told her paralegal. And 3 of the complainants withdrew suddenly after filing. Her computer pinged with an encrypted message from an anonymous police source. Look into the Problem Officer program from 2018. Officers like Brennan don't get fired. They get relocated. At Atlanta Preparatory Academy, Elijah struggled through his first day back at school. Once friendly classmates now avoided eye contact while others stared with uncomfortable curiosity. His facial bruising had faded from purple to sickly yellow, his jaw still wired shut from surgery. In the cafeteria, he sat alone until Tyler Richardson, his lab partner, finally joined him. "My dad says you should have just complied," Tyler said awkwardly, "but I think what happened to you was really messed up." Elijah couldn't respond verbally, but his eyes conveyed both gratitude for the company and weariness at having his traumatic experience reduced to a political talking point. That evening, as Dr. Kimberly Washington finished her hospital rounds, her phone rang from an unlisted number. "Dr. Washington," a digitally altered voice stated, "your family should consider dropping this matter. Not everyone will be as gentle as Officer Brennan was with your son." Before she could respond, the caller disconnected. Shaken, she called Marcus only to learn that surveillance cameras around their home had been mysteriously disabled that afternoon. Have you ever witnessed injustice but felt powerless to speak up? Would you risk your safety to stand against corruption? How far would you go to protect your child from a system designed to crush them? As the Washingtons were discovering, justice doesn't simply arrive when called upon. It must be fought for against powerful forces determined to maintain the status quo. And sometimes, the very institutions meant to protect become the most dangerous opponents of all. What would you do if you were in Judge Washington's position? The fight for truth was just beginning, and the system was already showing its teeth. Judge Marcus Washington entered the federal courthouse through a side entrance, avoiding the cluster of reporters at the main steps. For the first time in his 15-year judicial career, he felt like an outsider in these marble halls. His colleague, Judge Stephanie Perkins, intercepted him before he reached his chambers. "Marcus, the Chief Judge, wants to see you," she said, her expression conveying concern beneath professional courtesy. Inside the wood-paneled office, Chief Judge William Hargrove didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Marcus, the Judicial Ethics Committee has received a complaint regarding your public statements about the Atlanta Police Department. They're questioning your impartiality in cases involving law enforcement." Marcus maintained his composure. "I've made no public statements beyond confirming my son was assaulted. Who filed this complaint?" Hargrove shifted uncomfortably. "It was submitted anonymously, but the committee has decided to review all your pending cases involving police matters. They're suggesting voluntary recusal until your personal situation is resolved." The implication was clear. Marcus's fight for his son's justice was now threatening his professional standing. Across town, Officer Ryan Brennan sat in the wood-paneled offices of William Parker, the highest-profile defense attorney for police officers in the Southeast. Parker's client list included every officer acquitted of misconduct in Georgia for the past decade. The narrative needs reshaping. Parker explained his Harvard Law pedigree evident in every calculated word. "You were a dedicated officer responding to community concerns. You had no way of knowing who the boy was. When he reached into his pocket, you perceived a threat based on your training and experience." Brennan nodded eagerly. He was acting suspicious looking at houses. Parker continued, "We'll emphasize your service record, your community commendations. The media wants to make this racial, but we'll focus on the split-second decisions officers must make in potentially dangerous situations." Meanwhile, the Atlanta Police Union President Michael Greaves held a press conference on the precinct steps. "Officer Brennan has served this community with distinction for 15 years. One edited video doesn't show the full context of a complex situation. We stand firmly behind our brother in blue during this witch hunt." As Greaves spoke, leaflets circulated in Oakwood Heights announcing the formation of a community safety coalition. The elegant cardstock invitations to the inaugural meeting came from the address of Margaret Whitfield, whose husband's investment firm managed pension funds for the police department. The coalition's stated mission: supporting our officers and maintaining the security of our neighborhood. Detective Sandra Morris had become increasingly evasive in her communications with the Washington family. "The investigation is proceeding according to protocol," she repeated when Zara Johnson called for updates. "These matters take time to properly evaluate all evidence." What she didn't mention was her recent promotion recommendation from Chief Crawford contingent on her administrative discretion. Elijah's return to school brought new challenges. Some teachers seemed uncertain how to address the elephant in the room, while others overcompensated with excessive attention. In advanced physics, his favorite subject, Mr. Donaldson asked if Elijah would like to share his experience with the police as a real-world application of force and impact principles. During lunch, Elijah noticed students at nearby tables filming him surreptitiously for social media. A few supportive students formed a protective circle around him, while others wore thin blue line pins in silent counter-protest. The school administration, caught between wealthy parents with police connections and concerns about Elijah's well-being, opted for an ineffective healing circle that devolved into political arguments between students parroting their parents' views. At her law office, Zara Johnson discovered disturbing patterns in Officer Brennan's employment history. He transferred from 3 departments in 8 years, she told Judge Washington during their secure meeting at Pastor Thomas's church. Each transfer followed excessive force complaints that were closed without discipline. His personnel file was scrubbed before each move. More troubling was her discovery about case assignments. "I've analyzed every police misconduct case in the district for the past 5 years. There's a pattern of certain judges consistently ruling in favor of officers despite evidence. Judge Richard Hampton has dismissed 87% of misconduct claims, well above statistical norms. That evening, the Washington family found their mailbox filled with letters divided between heartfelt support and explicit threats. "Go back where you belong," read one note, though the family had lived in Atlanta for generations. Another envelope contained photos of their home taken from different angles, a clear intimidation tactic. Judge Washington contacted their security company about the cameras, only to learn that the system had been professionally compromised, not simply vandalized. Someone used specialized equipment to loop the feed without triggering alarms, the technician explained. FBI agent Rodriguez called with troubling news. "Judge Washington, my preliminary inquiry suggests a broader investigation into Atlanta PD may already be underway. I can't share details, but I've flagged your son's case to the appropriate team. Be careful who you trust within local law enforcement." Pastor Thomas organized a peaceful march from his church to police headquarters attended by thousands. The police response included riot gear-mounted units and an overwhelming show of force that created tension where none had existed. News cameras captured officers removing their name badges before the crowd arrived, a violation of department policy that went unaddressed by supervisors. Dr. Kimberly Washington arrived at Atlanta Memorial for her surgical rounds to find her hospital privileges temporarily adjusted pending review. The medical chief of staff, Dr. Harrison, avoided meeting her eyes. "It's just administrative, something about insurance liability during ongoing legal matters." What he didn't mention was the hospital's multi-million-dollar contract with the city or the 3 board members with connections to the police union. That afternoon, Zara Johnson received an unexpected visitor at her office. Officer James Wilson, 26, a rookie who had been present after Elijah's assault, sat nervously in her reception area. "I need to talk to you," he said quietly, "but not here. I think they're watching your office." His hands trembled slightly as he slid a note across the desk with an address. "Tonight at 8. Come alone." As Zara nodded, Wilson added, "They're not going to let this go easily. You have no idea how deep this runs or what they're willing to do to protect themselves." The Washington family gathered that evening in their living room, security consultants sweeping for listening devices while installing new cameras. Marcus shared the ethics committee investigation. Kimberly, her hospital situation, and Elijah, the school's toxic environment. The family that had once represented black excellence and achievement now found themselves under siege from the very institutions they had served faithfully. "They're trying to isolate us," Marcus observed. "Pressure us from every angle until we accept a settlement with a confidentiality agreement." Kimberly took her husband's hand. "They don't know who they're dealing with. This isn't just about Elijah anymore." Elijah, who had remained mostly silent since the attack, spoke through his healing jaw. "I keep thinking about the other kids this happened to, the ones whose parents aren't judges and doctors. Who fights for them?" In that moment, despite the threats surrounding them, the Washington family found new resolve. They couldn't yet see the full scope of the corruption they were challenging or how high it reached, but they understood with perfect clarity that retreating now would betray not just their son, but every victim who lacked their resources and platform. What none of them realized was that Officer Wilson's decision to come forward would soon expose a conspiracy more extensive and sinister than any of them had imagined, one that would make their fight for justice exponentially more dangerous. The abandoned warehouse at the edge of the industrial district loomed dark against the night sky as Zara Johnson parked 3 blocks away, following security protocols from her previous work with whistleblowers. Officer James Wilson emerged from shadows as she approached, nervousness evident in his constantly scanning gaze. "I shouldn't be here," he began without preamble. "If they find out I'm talking to you, best case scenario is I lose my job. Worst case." He left the implication hanging. Inside the warehouse, sitting on overturned crates beneath a single hanging bulb, Wilson revealed the department's systematic cover-up culture. "It starts in training," he explained. "Not the official academy training, but what happens after in the precincts. Senior officers teach rookies how to maintain control of situations and neighborhoods." Wilson described unofficial sessions where officers learn to disable body cameras without leaving evidence of tampering. They call it going dark tactically. Press the button sequence like you're checking it's working, but it actually corrupts the file while still showing recording status. More disturbing were Wilson's revelations about Officer Brennan. The brass knuckles are his signature. He calls them his attitude adjusters. Most officers look the other way because Brennan handles the dirty work that keeps certain neighborhoods in line. Wilson provided names of other victims, primarily black youth from less affluent neighborhoods who lacked the Washington family's resources and connections. There was a 14-year-old last year, Darius Jackson. Brennan caught him cutting through Oakwood Heights to get home faster. Beat him so bad he lost vision in one eye. The official report said Darius attacked Brennan with a knife. There was no knife. As Wilson spoke, Zara recorded discreetly, knowing this testimony could break the case wide open, but also recognizing the danger it placed Wilson in. "There's something else," Wilson added hesitantly. "Detective Morris, who's handling the internal investigation. She's been seeing Chief Crawford for at least 2 years. Everyone knows, but nobody talks about it. There's no way she's conducting an impartial investigation." Across town, the Washington family returned home from dinner to find their property vandalized. Red spray paint across their garage door spelled out racial slurs, while their mailbox had been smashed. Glass from broken windows glittered on the front lawn. Officers responded to their call with conspicuous slowness, the first patrol car arriving 45 minutes after Marcus's call to emergency services. "Probably just teenagers," the responding officer suggested with barely concealed indifference. "We'll take a report, but don't expect much." The next morning, Judge Marcus Washington arrived at the federal courthouse to find Chief Judge Hargrove waiting with a formal letter. "The Ethics Committee has recommended your temporary removal from the bench pending investigation," Hargrove stated, genuine regret in his voice. "I fought against this, Marcus, but I was outvoted. They're citing public statements you never actually made. Someone is pulling strings here." For the first time in his distinguished career, Marcus Washington was barred from his own chambers while ethics investigators reviewed his case files. The media narrative began shifting subtly as more evidence emerged, and Washington family supporters grew more vocal. National news outlets picked up the story, and several Atlanta officers anonymously confirmed parts of Wilson's account to reporters. Public opinion polls showed growing skepticism about the department's version of events. At her cramped office, Zara Johnson connected increasingly disturbing dots. The police union's political donations aligned perfectly with judicial appointments and case assignments, she told Marcus during their secure meeting at Pastor Thomas's church basement. And 3 development companies have contributed heavily to both the union and certain judges' election campaigns. She spread documents across the table. There's a clear financial relationship between the police union Judge Hampton, who gets all the sensitive misconduct cases, and Crawford Development Group owned by Chief Crawford's brother. National civil rights organizations announced their involvement, sending legal teams and media specialists to support the Washington family's fight. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund filed motions for federal oversight of the Atlanta Police Department, citing pattern and practice violations. Meanwhile, Elijah Washington transformed his trauma into purpose, starting a youth support group for victims of police violence. Meeting first in Pastor Thomas's church basement, then expanding to community centers across Atlanta, the group provided both emotional support and practical guidance for young people navigating encounters with law enforcement. "They want us to stay scared and isolated," Elijah told the group, despite his still healing jaw. "But together we're stronger than their system." Dr. Kimberly Washington, reviewing medical files for a research project, discovered a disturbing pattern of injuries in young black males brought to the emergency department from police encounters. Comparing cases, she found descriptions of distinctive bruising patterns consistent with brass knuckles, yet none of the reports mentioned this specific weapon. More troubling, she found evidence that certain patient records had been altered after submission, with original diagnostic codes changed to less serious classifications. The FBI investigation expanded beyond Agent Rodriguez's initial inquiry. Justice Department Civil Rights Division attorneys arrived in Atlanta, establishing a command center to coordinate with local FBI agents. Their presence signaled the seriousness with which federal authorities now viewed the situation, though their investigation remained officially separate from Elijah's case. At a community meeting, Pastor Thomas received an unmarked envelope containing a flash drive. The contents shocked even the veteran activist internal police department emails discussing arrest quotas specifically targeting minority neighborhoods, with officers evaluated based on their community management statistics. One email from Chief Crawford explicitly instructed supervisors to ensure officers maintained appropriate demographic balances in quality of life enforcement. That evening, Officer Brennan received a text message requesting an urgent meeting at an underground parking garage downtown. Chief Crawford and a representative from the mayor's office waited in the shadows. "This situation has become politically complicated," the mayor's aide explained. "We need to discuss exit strategies that protect the department's reputation and the city's liability exposure." As they spoke, Judge Washington faced his own challenge. An envelope delivered to his home contained photos of him meeting with a female law clerk 5 years earlier, images manipulated to suggest an inappropriate relationship. A note accompanying the photos read, "Ethics violations work both ways, Judge. Back off now, or these go public." The attempted blackmail only strengthened Marcus's resolve. The fabricated evidence confirmed what he now suspected. This wasn't just about protecting one officer, but about preserving a system of power and control that extended far beyond the police department. As these events unfolded, Officer Wilson failed to report for his shift. His apartment found empty with signs of a struggle. His disappearance sent a chilling message to anyone else considering breaking the blue wall of silence. The Washington family now faced an organized, powerful opposition willing to use every tool at their disposal, from professional destruction to physical intimidation. But what their opponents failed to understand was that each escalation only confirmed the righteousness of their cause and strengthened their determination to expose the truth, no matter the personal cost. FBI Agent Rodriguez slid a classified folder across the table to Judge Washington in the secure meeting room. "This goes beyond Officer Brennan," she explained, her voice low despite the swept room. "We've uncovered evidence of a specialized police unit operating in Atlanta for at least 5 years, officially designated Neighborhood Integrity Task Force, but internally known as the Cleanup Crew." The documents revealed a disturbing operation, a hand-picked team of officers targeting demographic anomalies in gentrifying neighborhoods using intimidation and excessive force to discourage undesirable elements from remaining in areas slated for development. More shocking was the connection to real estate developers, including Oak Ridge Partners, whose principal investor was none other than Judge Richard Hampton, Marcus's judicial colleague, who consistently dismissed police misconduct cases. Hampton has been strategically assigned cases involving officers from this task force. Rodriguez continued. 94% dismissal rate with sealed records. The remaining cases settled with confidentiality agreements. The evidence suggested Mayor Lawrence Wilson not only knew about the discriminatory practices, but had helped establish the unit during his previous position as city council president. Financial records showed property values dropping after targeted enforcement operations, followed by bulk purchases by development companies connected to both Hampton and Police Chief Crawford's family. Meanwhile, the search for Officer Wilson intensified after his missed shifts. Atlanta police officially listed him as missing under suspicious circumstances, though the investigation seemed perfunctory at best. 3 days after his disappearance, Wilson was found in an alley behind a downtown bar, beaten severely, his police badge stuffed into his mouth as a message. Hospitalized in critical condition, he remained unconscious, unable to identify his attackers. Judge Washington, acting on instinct honed by years on the bench, arranged a seemingly casual lunch with Judge Hampton at the exclusive Magnolia Club. With a recording device provided by the FBI concealed in his watch, Marcus steered the conversation toward police reform. These misconduct cases are becoming problematic. He mentioned casually, "The Washington boys' situation has brought unwanted attention." Hampton took the bait. "These neighborhood improvement initiatives require certain enforcement flexibility," he responded after ensuring no servers were nearby. "The property value implications alone justify special handling. Your boy was simply in the wrong demographic profile for Oakwood Heights." The recorded conversation implicated Hampton in not just judicial misconduct, but criminal conspiracy. At a church community center, Elijah's youth group made a breakthrough discovery. Mapping every reported police brutality incident over property records revealed a perfect correlation. Excessive force complaints spiked precisely 3 to 6 months before major property devaluations and subsequent developer purchases. "They're not just racist," 17-year-old Kiara Jackson observed as the group analyzed their findings. "They're weaponizing racism for profit." Dr. Kimberly Washington, working with a trusted colleague, documented medical evidence linking Officer Brennan to at least 7 previously unreported assaults based on distinctive injury patterns. The brass knuckles left characteristic fracture patterns that a forensic pathologist confirmed could be matched to a specific weapon. When this evidence reached FBI agent Rodriguez, she connected it to an encrypted communication system her team had discovered between police leadership and certain city officials. The messages, disguised as administrative updates, contained coded instructions for targeting specific neighborhoods and individuals. The conspiracy was larger and more organized than anyone had initially suspected. Are you surprised by how deep institutional corruption can run? Comment number 1 if you believe money is the real motive behind many instances of racial injustice, or number 2 if you think racism itself is the primary driving force. Hit like if you're shocked by how many different officials and institutions can be complicit in covering up injustice. Subscribe to see how the Washington family and their allies will use these shocking revelations to fight back against this corrupt system. Against this backdrop of mounting evidence, Police Chief Crawford held a press conference announcing Officer Brennan's reinstatement. After thorough investigation, Officer Brennan has been cleared of wrongdoing in the Washington incident. He will return to active duty, effective immediately. The brazen move, coming despite overwhelming evidence and ongoing federal investigation, signaled the department's confidence in their protective systems. Mayor Wilson publicly questioned the Washington family's motives during a radio interview. One has to wonder if this prestigious family is using an unfortunate misunderstanding to advance certain political agendas, he suggested. Officer Brennan has served our city faithfully for 15 years. Should his career be destroyed over one disputed incident, Officer Brennan himself appeared on a sympathetic news program portraying himself as a victim of anti-police sentiment while recounting a heavily sanitized version of his encounter with Elijah. "I was simply responding to community concerns about suspicious activity." He claimed his uniform freshly pressed for the camera. "When the subject made a sudden movement toward his pocket, I acted according to my training to protect myself and the community." The interview never mentioned the brass knuckles or racial slurs captured on video. The next morning, Pastor Thomas arrived at his church to find windows shattered and historical civil rights photographs defaced with spray paint. The church, a landmark in Atlanta's black community that had hosted Martin Luther King Jr. during the civil rights movement, had stood as a symbol of resilience for generations. Its desecration sent a clear message about the forces they were challenging. Judge Washington faced a critical decision: continue working through official channels, now proven to be corrupted, or take the mounting evidence directly to the media. The judicial ethics investigation against him had expanded, with investigators now examining cases from his entire career. His reputation, built over decades of principled service, hung in the balance. During this deliberation, Zara Johnson made a breakthrough discovery. Judge Hampton's financial disclosures, when cross-referenced with property records and shell company registrations, revealed direct financial ties to both the police union's investment fund and the development companies benefiting from the neighborhood improvement operations. Meanwhile, Officer Wilson regained consciousness in the hospital, immediately requesting protection from non-Atlanta PD officers. Under FBI guard, he identified his attackers as members of the specialized cleanup crew unit operating on direct orders from department leadership. His testimony provided the final connections needed to understand the full scope of the conspiracy. A coordinated effort between police leadership, judicial figures, and development interests to systematically remove black residents from valuable real estate corridors through targeted harassment, false arrests, and violent intimidation when property values dropped due to the manufactured crime problems. Connected developers purchased entire blocks at depressed prices before redevelopment. The conspiracy had operated successfully for years, with profits in the hundreds of millions of dollars, all built on the foundation of racialized police violence. As the Washington family reviewed this evidence with their growing coalition of supporters, the machinery of institutional power continued working against them. But with federal investigators now fully engaged and multiple witnesses coming forward, the conspiracy began showing cracks. The question remaining was whether justice could overcome a system designed to protect itself, and what price the Washington family might ultimately pay for challenging powerful interests that had operated unchecked for generations. Would the system crush those fighting to expose it, or would truth finally prevail against the forces of corruption and racism that had shaped Atlanta's development for decades? The answer would soon emerge, but not before the most dangerous phase of their fight tested every resource and relationship they possessed. The video began with a simple title card, "The Pattern of Pain, Officer Ryan Brennan's Atlanta." What followed was 5 minutes of meticulously compiled cell phone footage showing Brennan's assaults on multiple black youth over 3 years, culminating with Elijah's beating. Elijah's youth group had created the compilation, working with a volunteer film student to verify each clip's authenticity and timeline. Within 24 hours of its posting, the video had been viewed 17 million times, shared by celebrities, politicians, and activists across the political spectrum. Major news networks picked up the story, unable to ignore the visual evidence of repeated similar assaults by the same officer who had just been publicly cleared and reinstated. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, and international outlets ran the footage alongside interviews with previous victims who had been silenced or settled for small sums with confidentiality agreements. As public attention intensified, Pastor Thomas organized a massive community forum where victims shared testimonials revealing decades of systematic abuse in minority neighborhoods. This isn't about one officer or one incident. 67-year-old Vietnam veteran Robert Johnson testified, removing his hat to show a scar from a police baton. This is about a system designed to keep us afraid and compliant while they take our neighborhoods piece by piece. Former residents of gentrified areas described patterns of increased police presence, harassment, and selective enforcement that preceded development projects. Business owners explained how code violations were suddenly enforced against black-owned establishments, while white-owned businesses with identical issues received warnings or extensions. The forum, live-streamed to millions, presented undeniable evidence of coordinated discrimination spanning administrations and police leadership changes. With the FBI investigation now public knowledge, Judge Washington was called to testify before a Justice Department inquiry. Despite warnings from colleagues that his testimony would end his judicial career, Marcus provided detailed evidence of case manipulation, judicial misconduct, and the systematic protection of abusive officers. "As a federal judge, I took an oath to uphold justice," he stated for the record. That oath doesn't allow exceptions for professional convenience or personal safety. While Washington testified, Police Chief Crawford and Mayor Wilson held emergency meetings with developers implicated in the scheme. Inside City Hall, conference rooms, blame shifting, and evidence destruction began in earnest. Plausible deniability is our priority now. One developer was overheard telling the mayor's chief of staff, "Nothing connects us directly to enforcement decisions." Their panic increased when investigative journalists published a comprehensive exposé detailing the real estate scheme coordinated police harassment to depress property values, followed by bulk purchases at reduced prices. Rezoning applications miraculously approved, despite community opposition and massive profits once revitalization projects completed. Financial records showed certain police officials receiving consulting fees from development companies through shell corporations, while judges like Hampton invested in these companies before favorable rulings that affected property values. Officer Brennan, watching his department leadership prepare to sacrifice him, agreed to meet with Zara Johnson at a secure location arranged by FBI agent Rodriguez. "I was following established protocols, though," he insisted initially, still justifying his actions. "Every officer in the Neighborhood Integrity Task Force used the same techniques. I'm just the one who got caught on video." Gradually, Brennan's self-protection instinct overcame his loyalty. He provided a recording of a meeting where superior officers explicitly ordered targeting of demographic anomalies in transitioning neighborhoods. "Find reasons to stop them," a captain instructed in the recording. "Make it uncomfortable for them to stay. The developers need these blocks cleared by year-end." Outside police headquarters, the protest that began with a few hundred grew to thousands as citizens from every Atlanta neighborhood joined together. Unlike previous demonstrations, this gathering included substantial numbers of white residents from affluent areas, their perspective transformed by undeniable evidence of corruption that threatened the integrity of their entire city. "I always supported the police," 58-year-old Oakwood Heights resident Catherine Miller told reporters. "But what they did to that Washington boy and others isn't policing, it's organized crime with badges." The protest remained absolutely peaceful, yet conveyed unmistakable power in its size and diversity. Speakers rotated throughout the day from civil rights veterans to teenage victims of police harassment, creating a comprehensive narrative of systemic failure and community determination to achieve reform. Faced with mounting evidence and public pressure, the protective structures began collapsing. The police union distanced itself from Brennan, issuing a statement that individual officers who violate our standards of conduct damage the reputation of all law enforcement professionals. This transparent attempt to isolate Brennan as a bad apple contradicted their previous full-throated defense of his actions. Judge Hampton was caught by courthouse security attempting to remove boxes of documents late at night. Documents later found to contain evidence of case-fixing and financial connections to police misconduct cases he had dismissed. The FBI secured these records, adding them to their expanding investigation. The department officially terminated Officer Brennan, describing his actions as completely contrary to our values and training, despite having reinstated him just days earlier. Chief Crawford announced the disbanding of the Neighborhood Integrity Task Force, claiming it had deviated from its original community-focused mission under previous leadership. Mayor Wilson, sensing political disaster, announced an independent investigation led by a committee of his own appointees, a transparent attempt to control the narrative that fooled no one. Throughout these institutional contortions, Elijah Washington emerged as a powerful voice for reform. Despite his ongoing physical and psychological recovery, he spoke eloquently at community meetings and gave a particularly moving interview that humanized the experience of police violence for audiences who had previously been skeptical of such claims. "I didn't understand how completely your sense of safety can be destroyed in minutes," he explained, "or how institutions stack themselves against you when you seek justice. This was never just about my case, but about a system that decided certain people's rights and dignity matter less than others. As the unified community pressure continued, Officer Wilson recovered enough to provide detailed testimony to federal investigators, becoming a key witness in building cases against department leadership. Multiple officers, sensing the changing tide and seeking to avoid prosecution themselves, came forward with additional evidence of systematic misconduct. In pre-dawn raids, FBI agents arrested 4 high-ranking police officials on charges ranging from civil rights violations to racketeering. Judge Hampton was taken into custody while attempting to board a private plane to the Cayman Islands, where investigators later discovered accounts containing millions in suspected kickbacks from developers and the police union. The real estate developers faced their own legal jeopardy as evidence of their coordination with police to target specific residents emerged from seized records and cooperative witnesses. These companies, which had reshaped entire neighborhoods through methods now revealed as criminal, saw their stock values plummet as investors fled the growing scandal. Despite these victories, the Washington family continued facing challenges. Judge Washington remained temporarily removed from the bench during the ethics investigation, though public opinion had shifted overwhelmingly in his favor. The family still received threats, now primarily from individuals affiliated with the exposed conspiracy who faced criminal charges. And most concerningly, evidence related to the federal investigation began disappearing from secure storage, suggesting the corruption reached higher levels than initially suspected. FBI agent Rodriguez, who had championed the investigation from its earliest stages, was placed on administrative leave for alleged procedural violations, a transparent attempt to derail the probe she had built. As Officer Brennan prepared to offer devastating testimony implicating the entire command structure in exchange for sentencing considerations, the Washington family and their allies recognized they had entered the most dangerous phase of their fight for justice. The exposed system, now fighting for survival, would deploy every remaining resource against them. Yet for the first time they fought with the power of public awareness and undeniable evidence on their side. The awakening had begun, and Atlanta would never be the same. Rain fell steadily as Justice Department officials announced from the steps of the Richard B. Russell Federal Building that the investigation into the Atlanta Police Department had expanded to include judicial corruption and governmental misconduct. Evidence indicates systematic civil rights violations orchestrated at the highest levels of multiple institutions, U.S. Attorney Gabriela Mendez stated. Today marks the beginning, not the end, of our pursuit of accountability. Inside the building, Officer Ryan Brennan sat with federal prosecutors, his plea agreement finalized after providing evidence against 27 fellow officers and officials, in exchange for reduced sentences on multiple assault charges and civil rights violations. Brennan detailed 15 years of departmental practices targeting black residents in developing areas. His testimony exposed how the Neighborhood Integrity Task Force operated with explicit instructions to remove demographic obstacles to investment through harassment, false arrests, and intimidation. Simultaneously, in a courthouse across town, Judge Richard Hampton appeared for his arraignment on corruption charges, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. The once powerful judge who had dismissed nearly 100 police misconduct cases entered in handcuffs, his requests for special treatment and bail considerations denied by a visiting judge brought in specifically to avoid conflicts of interest. At police headquarters, Chief Crawford held a brief press conference announcing his resignation for health reasons, though sources within the department confirmed he had been given the choice to resign or face public termination. Sweating profusely despite the air conditioning, Crawford read a prepared statement thanking officers for their service before departing without taking questions, ignoring reporters shouting about his brother's development company and its connections to police operations. Mayor Lawrence Wilson, whose administration had overseen the corrupt system for 8 years, attempted damage control through careful political triangulation. "I am appalled by these revelations of rogue elements within our police department," he declared, despite evidence showing his direct knowledge of the targeting programs. My administration will cooperate fully with federal investigators to ensure all responsible parties face justice. His approval ratings plummeted nonetheless, with recall petitions circulating in every city district. On Capitol Hill, 13-year-old Elijah Washington testified before a congressional committee on police reform, his composed demeanor and articulate description of both his assault and the subsequent cover-up attempts drawing bipartisan praise. "The officer who attacked me was following established procedures," Elijah explained to the committee. "Replacing him alone would have solved nothing without addressing the system that rewarded his behavior and protected him from consequences." His testimony, alongside evidence compiled by his youth advocacy group, became central to proposed federal legislation establishing national standards for police accountability. Officer James Wilson, still recovering from his beating, but determined to speak out, provided key testimony, identifying which officers participated in the cleanup crew and how they systematically targeted black residents while protecting white residents committing identical violations. "We had explicit instructions about enforcement priorities based on race and property values," Wilson testified. "Areas slated for development received special attention with specific demographics targeted for removal." Acting on this testimony, FBI agents conducted coordinated pre-dawn raids, arresting 17 officers identified as key participants in civil rights violations. The arrests sent shockwaves through the department, with dozens of officers calling in sick the following day, creating a temporary staffing crisis that necessitated state police assistance for emergency calls. Judge Marcus Washington remained temporarily removed from the bench during the ongoing ethics investigation, though public support for his reinstatement grew as evidence vindicated his actions. The Judicial Ethics Committee itself came under scrutiny when communications revealed several members had connections to police union investments and development companies implicated in the scandal. Behind closed doors, judicial leadership debated how to address the unprecedented situation of a judge fighting corruption within the very system he served. Meanwhile, real estate developers, Central Atlanta Partners, and Oak Ridge Development faced both criminal charges and civil lawsuits as evidence emerged of their coordination with police to target specific neighborhoods. Emails obtained through federal warrants showed executives discussing demographic obstacles to development and the need for municipal assistance in clearing investment corridors of problematic elements. The company's stock prices collapsed as major investors distanced themselves from the growing scandal. Dr. Kimberly Washington established the Medical Advocacy Project for Victims of Police Violence, bringing together healthcare professionals to document and treat injuries sustained during police encounters. The program received emergency federal funding after presenting evidence that hundreds of victims had received inadequate medical attention due to pressure on healthcare providers to minimize documentation of police-inflicted injuries. Zara Johnson, whose tireless legal work had helped break the case open, received a special appointment as prosecutor for police misconduct cases, bringing her experience and determination to cases previously buried by complicit officials. Her first actions included reopening 79 dismissed excessive force complaints for review and possible prosecution. Pastor Raymond Thomas led community reconciliation efforts, bringing together reformed police officers, community members, and city officials to establish new frameworks for community-oriented policing. "Justice isn't just about punishment," he reminded attendees at each meeting. "It's about creating systems that work for everyone and healing the deep wounds caused by generations of discriminatory practices." The police union leadership implicated in financial misconduct through investments connected to the development scheme faced removal by rank-and-file officers who voted for an emergency leadership change. "We became cops to protect our communities, not to serve as private security for real estate developers," new union president Officer Michaela Rodriguez stated. "We need to rebuild trust through transparency and accountability." National attention to Atlanta's case brought similar situations to light in other cities, with investigations launched in Memphis, Baltimore, Chicago, and Los Angeles, examining connections between police enforcement patterns, development interests, and judicial protections. Advocacy groups compiled data showing identical patterns of targeted enforcement preceding gentrification across the country. Through these professional victories, Elijah continued his personal struggle with trauma. During public appearances, he sometimes paused mid-sentence, momentarily transported back to the sidewalk, where Officer Brennan's brass knuckles had shattered his sense of safety, along with his facial bones. Yet each time he found his voice again, his resilience inspiring others to come forward with their stories. The Washington family's fight seemed to be succeeding beyond their expectations when a new threat emerged. Evidence crucial to the federal prosecution mysteriously disappeared from secure storage facilities, including Officer Brennan's brass knuckles, key financial records, and digital evidence of communications between officials. A forensic examination showed the evidence room's security system had been disabled using federal security codes, not local police access. Agent Rodriguez, who had built the case from its earliest stages, was unexpectedly suspended for alleged procedural violations, a transparent attempt to derail the investigation she championed. When Rodriguez attempted to meet with Washington to discuss her concerns, she discovered her security clearance had been revoked and her case files restricted. These developments suggested the corruption reached higher levels than initially suspected, potentially including federal law enforcement or justice officials with the power to obstruct the investigation. As the family absorbed this setback, Officer Brennan contacted Zara through secure channels with an urgent message. They're cutting deals with the higher-ups. Hampton and Crawford are offering information on federal officials in exchange for reduced charges. There's a meeting tomorrow night at the Westlake Hotel to finalize terms. The Washington family now face their most challenging decision, whether to trust a system that had repeatedly demonstrated its corruption or to take more direct action to ensure the truth remained public, regardless of who it implicated. Whatever they decided would carry enormous personal and professional risks, but allowing the full truth to be buried was simply not an option after coming so far and sacrificing so much. The sealed federal courtroom fell silent as the special prosecutor finished reading the findings of the 3-month investigation. Judge Marcus Washington sat in the gallery, no longer a subject of ethics investigation, but now offered an unprecedented opportunity appointment as head of the newly established Justice Department Police Accountability Division. Your experiences, both professional and personal, make you uniquely qualified to lead this essential reform effort. Attorney General Rebecca Liu explained afterward, "Sometimes those most tested by a broken system become its most effective healers." Across Washington, D.C., in a wood-paneled Senate hearing room, Elijah Washington's testimony concluded to rare bipartisan applause. His poise and measured recommendations for systematic police reform had transcended political divisions, humanizing statistical discussions with lived experience. The Elijah Washington Police Accountability Act would establish national standards for officer conduct, create independent review mechanisms for misconduct allegations, and provide funding for community-based policing initiatives. Behind the scenes, Officer Ryan Brennan's cooperation had exceeded prosecutors' expectations. His testimony implicated not just Atlanta officials, but judges, officers, and political figures across multiple jurisdictions who had participated in similar targeting schemes. The scope of corruption revealed was so extensive that federal authorities made a controversial decision. Instead of prison, Brennan entered witness protection after providing names reaching state and federal levels. The public interest in exposing the full network outweighs the satisfaction of seeing one officer incarcerated. U.S. Attorney Mendez explained to the Washington family in a private meeting. Though initially outraged, they eventually recognized the strategic necessity when the extent of the conspiracy became clear. In an Atlanta federal courtroom, Judge Richard Hampton received a 15-year sentence for corruption and conspiracy, his judicial pension revoked and assets seized to compensate victims of his rigged rulings. Your betrayal of the fundamental principles of justice is particularly egregious given the trust placed in you, the presiding judge stated during sentencing. You turned the scales of justice into a marketplace where rights could be purchased and sold. The real estate developers who had orchestrated neighborhood clearances through corrupt police practices faced both criminal penalties and civil liability. Central Atlanta Partners declared bankruptcy after class action lawsuits from displaced residents resulted in a $300 million judgment. Oak Ridge Development's executives received federal prison sentences for conspiracy, racketeering, and civil rights violations. The company's projects were placed in receivership with profits directed toward community restoration and affordable housing initiatives. Mayor Lawrence Wilson's administration collapsed under the weight of revelations about his direct involvement in the targeting scheme. A special recall election resulted in his removal from office, replaced by former civil rights attorney Danielle Morrison, who had represented several victims of police violence. Her first official act was establishing a reconciliation commission to document abuses and create pathways for community healing. Within the Atlanta Police Department, structural reorganization went beyond symbolic leadership changes. The entire command structure was rebuilt with community oversight at every level. Recruitment practices, training protocols, and promotion criteria were completely redesigned with emphasis on community engagement skills rather than traditional enforcement metrics. Officer James Wilson, fully recovered from his beating, became training officer for the new Community Partnership Division, teaching recruits to measure success through problem-solving and relationship building rather than arrest statistics. "We're redefining what it means to protect and serve," Wilson explained to his first class of cadets. "Safety comes from trust, not fear." Dr. Kimberly Washington's medical advocacy program received federal funding as a pilot initiative, expanding to 7 additional cities with similar patterns of police violence. Healthcare providers received specialized training in documenting injuries and supporting victims through both physical recovery and legal proceedings. Medical evidence became crucial in establishing patterns of abuse, Kimberly explained at a national conference. These injuries tell stories that can't be dismissed or buried in internal investigations. Zara Johnson's appointment as special prosecutor resulted in successful prosecutions of 34 officers and officials involved in civil rights violations and corruption. Her methodical approach to building cases withstood aggressive defense tactics and established new precedents for police accountability. "Justice delayed is often justice denied," she noted after securing convictions against officers who had escaped accountability for years. But these cases prove it's never too late to hold power accountable. Pastor Raymond Thomas's appointment to the Police Oversight Committee formalized the community's role in departmental decisions. The committee reviewed officer conduct, promotional decisions, and policy changes, ensuring reforms remained responsive to community needs rather than institutional convenience. True healing requires both accountability and ongoing vigilance, Thomas reminded the committee at each meeting. "We honor victims by creating systems that prevent future abuses." For Elijah, personal healing paralleled systemic changes. Through therapy and the support of his youth advocacy network, he gradually reclaimed his sense of security and purpose. The nightmares decreased in frequency, though certain triggers, flashing lights, the sound of handcuffs clicking, could still transport him momentarily back to that sidewalk. Yet rather than being defined by his trauma, Elijah channeled it into increasingly effective advocacy. His youth organization expanded nationally, training thousands of young people in both their rights during police encounters and constructive engagement with reform efforts. As the Washington family adjusted to their new normal, Marcus commuting to Washington, D.C., Kimberly balancing hospital duties with her advocacy program, Elijah dividing time between school and speaking engagements, they remained vigilant. Despite significant victories, threats persisted from those who had escaped justice. Security remained a necessary part of their daily lives, a constant reminder of powerful interests still working against reform. The most significant revelation came in a classified briefing 6 months after the initial arrests. Evidence painstakingly reconstructed by Agent Rodriguez after her reinstatement pointed to State Governor Philip Anderson's direct involvement in coordinating the real estate scheme across multiple cities. Financial records revealed millions flowing through shell companies connected to the governor's family, while encrypted communications showed his office directing targeting priorities based on development opportunities. This conspiracy goes higher than anyone suspected, Rodriguez explained to the Washington family, and prosecuting a sitting governor presents unprecedented challenges, as Judge Washington considered this information, weighing professional obligations against family safety. Elijah made a decision that would reshape the narrative once again. His viral video statement about forgiveness and accountability transcended the case itself, becoming a touchstone in national conversations about justice reform. "I don't seek vengeance against Officer Brennan or any individual," he stated, his composed delivery belying his youth. "I seek a system where such abuses are impossible, not through wishful thinking, but through structural changes that recognize every person's humanity and dignity." The video reached 40 million views within days, commentary spanning the political spectrum, praising its wisdom and vision beyond Elijah's 13 years. Meanwhile, in a small town 2,000 miles from Atlanta, a man watched this video on a coffee shop television, his appearance altered by witness protection protocols, but his eyes unmistakable to anyone who knew Officer Ryan Brennan well. His expression revealed complex emotions: relief at escaping imprisonment, shame at actions he could never truly justify, and perhaps a glimmer of something new, understanding of the human consequences of systems he had enforced without question. Back in Atlanta, a new generation of officers graduated from the restructured police academy, their training fundamentally different from their predecessors. Community engagement skills received equal emphasis with tactical training, with success measured through problem-solving rather than enforcement statistics. Their instructors included reformed officers alongside community advocates, creating balance between professional knowledge and lived experience of policing's impact. As Elijah Washington prepared for high school, his experiences had shaped but not defined his future plans. "I'm interested in constitutional law," he told a career counselor. "Not just how laws are written, but how they're applied differently depending on who you are and where you live." The system that had failed him so profoundly was changing because of him, a legacy few 13-year-olds could claim. The Washington family's dining room table, once covered with legal documents and evidence, now held college brochures alongside advocacy campaign materials. Their fight for justice had transformed into a multi-generational mission to ensure systems worked equally for everyone, regardless of race, wealth, or power. The brass knuckles that had shattered Elijah's face now sat in a museum exhibition on police reform alongside the viral videos, court decisions, and legislation they had ultimately produced. What began as a brutal assault had catalyzed changes affecting millions, proving that even the most entrenched systems could be transformed when truth found its voice. What do you think about the changes that came from Elijah's case? Could something similar happen in your community? Comment below with your thoughts on police accountability and systematic change. If this story moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories of justice and resilience. Share this video with someone who needs to understand how change happens through courage and persistence. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one family's fight to transform pain into progress and create a more just system for everyone. This story illustrates how systemic injustice thrives when institutions protect their own interests above truth. What began as one officer's brutal racist act revealed an entire ecosystem of corruption spanning police departments, courts, real estate developers, and government officials. The Washington family's journey teaches us that fighting injustice requires extraordinary courage when those in power weaponize their authority against truth seekers. True change demands more than removing bad apples. It requires dismantling the systems that enable and reward abuse. Elijah's transformation from victim to advocate demonstrates how personal trauma can fuel powerful advocacy when channeled constructively. The most significant lesson is that accountability becomes possible when communities unite across racial and economic lines, when brave insiders break their silence, and when evidence reaches public consciousness despite institutional barriers. Justice isn't automatic. It's fought for by ordinary people, making extraordinary choices in the face of intimidation. No corrupt system, no matter how entrenched, can withstand the combined force of truth, community solidarity, and persistent demands for accountability. The Washington family story reminds us that the path to justice is neither short nor easy, but transformative change becomes possible when enough people refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. Has your perspective on policing and racial justice changed after hearing Elijah's story? Have you ever witnessed injustice but remained silent out of fear or uncertainty? What would you do if faced with a system determined to protect itself at the expense of truth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe everyone deserves equal treatment under the law, regardless of race or status, hit that like button to stand with families like the Washingtons. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that expose injustice and celebrate those brave enough to challenge corrupt systems. Share this video with someone who needs to understand how racial discrimination operates through institutions, not just individuals. Thank you for bearing witness to Elijah's journey from victim to changemaker. Together we can build communities where justice isn't just an ideal, but a lived reality for everyone, regardless of race, wealth, or power. Remember, silence serves the oppressor, never the oppressed.